Hello, book lovers. Alright, so if you have missed chapter 1, you can go over here and check that out, or maybe over here. I don't know, one or the other. Today we're going to be starting on chapter 2, so hit the intro.
I don't do it by the book, no, I do my own thing. That's why every single hook got them singing like me. And I ain't in any rush, cause I'm finally getting paid. Don't believe in any luck, I believe I'm self-made, yeah.
Now, this is chapter 2 of Sommerland Education. Seeing to the comfort of the dog, Maddie distracted Derek for a while once he got home, but he eventually had to go to bed, where he lay with his eyes open for a ridiculously long time, trying to think of the papers he had to grade, the assistant he might hire, the appointment tomorrow with the Paris Hilton wannabe who insisted her Pomeranian had every ailment she'd came across online. Anything besides Gage Tackett. He'd seen the young man as no more than a student for months, average, but with potential. Granted, he'd noticed Gage had a bad boy appeal, only that type had never attracted him. He liked intelligent, compassionate men, typically professionals like himself, close to his own 30 years. And certainly not students. Gage coming in with the dog had done a number on Derek's opinion of him. Derek had tried to pick apart the man's motives in saving the dog, but as far as he could tell, they were genuine. He cared about the dog, but he seemed to be trying hard not to, which made sense since he couldn't keep her. The next morning, Derek woke at precisely 5:45. He checked on Maddie, who was sleeping soundly, returned to his room to lay out his khaki dress pants, white shirt and charcoal v-neck sweater. Keeping to his routine, he went to take a quick shower, but the steady stream of almost frigid water didn't clear his head and wake him as it usually did. Instead, all the thoughts he'd avoided returned. He groaned as he closed his eyes and pictured Gage, moving closer to intimidate him, tone gruff as though he'd rather growl than speak. All those muscles Derek had seen earlier in the fall were thankfully hidden under his thick leather jacket, but he was aware of them. Derek had done a decent job standing up to the young man, but the sense of danger had quickened his pulse and hardened his cock. Arousal thrummed low in his balls as he washed his hair. He pictured those angry, dark green eyes, the moisture from melted snow on lips that appeared soft when Gage wasn't scowling or frowning. Thinking of Gage's lips was not smart. Derek cursed under his breath and adjusted the water to soak in the heat as he gave in, pouring some body wash into his palm to stroke his painfully throbbing dick. He jerked off roughly, slapping his other hand against a tiled wall for balance as he came, and his knees buckled. He finished washing, shut off the water, and went to dress. No point in dwelling on the recent addition to his spank bank, or that he hadn't come that fast since high school. He worked hard and rarely dated. His body needed some relief. Simple, really. Once he was dressed, adding a navy blue tie for good measure, since professionalism made for decent armor, Derek went to the kitchen to start the coffee. While it brewed, he opened a can of dog food. He heard the faint click of nails and glanced over his shoulder to see Maddie limp into the kitchen. Grinning, he filled the stainless steel food and water dishes he still had from the last dog he'd fostered, and placed both in the mounted stands. While Maddie ate, he gently petted her, pleased to see she didn't growl at him. Starved as she was, he wouldn't blame her, but this proved she had good temperament. He'd continue to observe her, but he had a feeling she'd be adopted quickly once she was cleaned up and healthy again, if she didn't already have an owner. He scratched behind her ear, then carefully bent one, then the other. There. She had no collar or tags, but the tattoo meant she belonged to someone. He grabbed a notepad from the table and jotted down the letter and the numbers. A quick search and he'd locate her master. and there would be absolutely no reason for Gage to come here any longer, which would be a relief. The doorbell sounded. He glanced over at the clock on the stove. Gage was early. Good boy. Derek chuckled as Maddie lifted her head, her pointed ears shifting and her tail wagging as she looked up at him. Yes, that's your hero. Stay. He'll be here in a minute. Maddie stayed where she was while Derek went to answer the door. He stood a little straighter as Gage gave him a stiff nod and walked in with an offhand, I'm on time. Early, actually, but it's an improvement. Derek ground his teeth as he watched Gage bend down to untie his boots. The leather jacket didn't cover the curve of Gage's ass, and the man filled his black jeans nicely. Derek found himself as irritated as he'd been when Gage had held out his hand last night. Remaining detached would be much easier if he didn't touch the man, or notice his ass. Derek cleared his throat. Would you like some coffee? Yes, please. Gage straightened and looked around. Where's my girl? She sleep okay? Nodding, Derek led the way to the kitchen. She's been eating well. I have canned food she likes in the cupboard. Good. He couldn't hold back a smile as Gage knelt beside Maddie and hugged the dog, ruffling her fur and laughing as she licked his face. He poured 2 mugs of coffee and glanced over his shoulder at Gage. How do you take your coffee? Black with a teaspoon of black-strap molasses if you have any. Molasses? Derek arched a brow when Gage shrugged like it was the most normal thing in the world. He fixed the coffee, adding cream to his own mug. He considered the sugar dish, then put it away and measured a teaspoon of molasses for his own coffee. He brought both cups to the table, inhaling the fragrant steam as Gage sat across from him. Gage brought his cup to his mouth, his lips twitching at the edges as though he was waiting for Derek's reaction. Rolling his eyes, Derek sipped at the coffee. The sweetness wasn't overpowering as he expected. It seemed to add to the richness of the coffee. He smiled at Gage. This is good. I think so. Gage set his mug on the table and wrapped his big hands around it. He seemed tired, but maybe he wasn't much of a morning person. He used his thumb to clean a drop of molasses from the side of his mug, then licked it off. His tongue traced his upper lip, a thoughtful expression on his face. What is it? Derek stared at his own mug, annoyed at how his dick hardened a bit more along his thigh with each little thing Gage did to draw attention to his mouth. The bastard was probably straight, and even if he wasn't, he was a student. Maybe if Derek repeated that to himself often enough, his body would get the picture. Shrugging, Gage muttered something about studying and chemistry. Enunciate, Mr. Tackett. Derek tried to keep his tone teasing, but he had a feeling he'd failed by the way Gage stiffened and sat up straight. Eyes narrowing, Gage stared at him. Damn, you're a bigger asshole than I thought you were. I'm failing at chemistry. Just wanted to know if you had a textbook I could study from since I didn't bring mine. I believe so, but you really should come more prepared. Derek knew he wasn't helping Gage's opinion of him, but what did it matter, really? Gage would come for the dog. They'd be civil to one another until she found a home, and their contract returned to 2 hours, 3 times a week in Derek's classroom. Thank you, Professor Paulson. I'll keep that in mind. Gage finished his coffee and went back to sit on the floor with Maddie. She wagged her tail and put her head on his lap with a soft hug. Derek could have sworn she was giving him a dirty look. He shook his head and headed to the living room. His old textbooks were on his large, antique bookshelf. He grabbed the chemistry textbook from his own freshman year and turned to bring it back to the kitchen. Slammed into Gage, who'd moved silently behind him. Sorry, Professor. Didn't mean to scare you. The look in Gage's eyes had changed. His lips curved slightly at the edges. He latched onto Derek's arm to keep him from falling. His hand still hadn't moved. You're probably in a hurry. Yes. Holding the book up, Derek tugged at his arm, relieved when Gage let him go. Here, there are notes in the margin that you may find useful. Thank you. Slipping out of reach, Derek cleared his throat. I'm not sure how late I'll be. There's beer in the fridge unless you're not of age, in which case, smooth, Professor. I'm 23. But I don't usually have beer before lunch. Gage chuckled as he took the textbook. Maybe I get what your issue with me is. You don't have to worry. I'm here for Maddie. And I can keep things professional. That would be best, though I'm not sure what you mean. How else would things be? Derek didn't want to read anything into Gage's words, but he couldn't help wondering why Gage would draw that line. A straight man wouldn't have bothered unless, well, some straight men like to flatter themselves and assume Derek wanted them. He could see Gage being that arrogant. Gage wet his bottom lip with his tongue, smirking when Derek stared at his lips. Doesn't matter. I agree. What are you waiting for, Professor? Gage braced his hand against the bookshelf, casually shifting closer to Derek. You don't want to be late. A sharp nod and Derek spun around, snatching up his jacket and barely shoving into his boots before he was out the door. He'd never been so eager to leave his own home, or wished he had a good reason to stay. Staring at the closed door, Gage let out a heavy sigh. He wasn't sure what had come over him, except that he found some perverse pleasure in getting under Professor Paulson's skin. Every time the man lost his superior attitude, his rigid composure, he became almost likable. Gage couldn't help notice the interest in those deep blue eyes that reminded him of the expanse of the sea from above, always so much more brilliant and beautiful on a flight back home. Paulson wasn't really Gage's type. He was too proper, too stiff, and not in any way Gage found useful. The fact the man was out and proud was a little shocking, actually. What bother coming out if you were going to spend all your time married to your damn job? You're one to speak. Gage rolled his eyes as he headed to the kitchen to fix Maddie another helping of canned dog food after checking to see that she'd licked her bowl clean. There was a pea pad on the floor, but she hadn't used it. Had Paulson changed it this morning? Gage hoped so, but he started to wonder when Maddie ignored the food and padded gingerly over to the back door. Paulson had a small gated yard, but Gage didn't like the idea of Maddie trampling through the snow with her wounded paw. He chewed on the edge of his lip as she whined and scratched at the door. He needed to keep her paw dry and warm. He had an idea. It didn't take long going through the kitchen drawers to find a plastic wrap. Paulson was predictably organized. Maddie sat still as he wrapped her paw, but her head was cocked to one side as though she wanted to know what the hell he was doing. He patted her head before pulling off one of his thick wool socks. He put one on her back leg and tied it in place with a length of rolled up plastic. She held her leg awkwardly, but seemed to forget about the makeshift booty when he opened the door. Scrambling down the steps, she squatted right at the bottom and pissed for what seemed like forever. Good girl. Gage laughed as she trampled into the snow and finished relieving herself, kicking up snow to cover the mess. It was still fucking cold outside, and this girl wasn't stupid. She trotted up the stairs, still careful with her back paw, and shook the snow from her fur as he closed and locked the door. He took off the sock, hung it on the door knob to dry, and gently removed the plastic wrap. Maddie ate and drank, then headed to the cushy dog bed in the living room for a nap. Pleased at how well she seemed to be doing, Gage settled on the sofa with Paulson's textbook and put in a few hours of studying. Pointless, because he still didn't understand half this shit, but hopefully something would stick. The notes were good, but hard to read. It was late afternoon before he started checking the time and wondering when Paulson would return. Gage didn't have classes today, so Paulson being late wasn't a big deal, but he'd planned to go to the gym. He'd never sleep if he didn't work out to exhaustion. More time passed, and the darkness outside prompted him to do some exercises in the living room. Push-ups, sit-ups, jumping jacks. He even used the ledge of the porch door to do some chin-ups. Got nice and sore and lay down on the sofa, threw his arm over his head, and closed his eyes. A bang outside made him jump. He threw himself off the sofa and crouched on the floor, felt Maddie's cold nose against his palm. He patted her head and sighed. Kinda used to comfort him like that when he got jumpy. Stationed in the desert, knowing he needed shut-eye. Sometimes he was too wired to fall asleep until Gunnar climbed into bed with him, resting his head on Gage's chest and grunting in a way that Gage took as an understanding rather than irritation. Gunnar never had a problem letting you know when he was annoyed. but he'd been patient with Gage, almost like he understood. Dragging a cushion off the sofa, Gage lay down next to Maddie, petted her as she curled up next to him. He tried to tell himself that she needed the comfort, but the truth was, the familiar warmth against his side, the weight of her laying half on his chest, helped him relax. And when darkness came, there was no noise, no imagined flash of fire that could disturb him. There were times when Derek hated this job. Any time that he had to shower because he was so covered in blood that gloves and the white jacket were pretty much useless, and the life he'd fought for was lost anyway. His whole body was sore. His eyes burned from the tears he'd barely contained. A dog he'd given first checkups, first shots, and backups, neutered and watched grow for 5 years. Gone. An open gate and the beagle, Popper, had taken a wild run around the block and gotten hit by a truck. The broken bones would have healed. Derek was confident of that, but the pain and the shock had been too much for the little dog. Hours of surgery, and Popper's heart couldn't take any more. The family had refused to let him put the dog down. They didn't care about the costs, not that he'd had the heart to charge them for his failed attempts. He'd given them a price from the start that they could manage. And if they didn't pay him at all, well, he really didn't care. Gage would probably be pissed about him coming back so late, but Derek didn't care about that either. He was housing and treating Maddie for free. If Gage doesn't appreciate it, fuck him. Opening his front door, Derek prepared himself for attitude at worst, cold indifference at best. But the house was quiet. Gage didn't have the key, so he couldn't have left. The door had been locked. Boots off, Derek stepped into the living room. The weight of one dog's loss lifted just a little as he met Maddie's eyes. She stared at him, lifting her head from Gage's chest where he slept on the floor. The young man was missing one sock, but other than that he was fully clothed, sprawled out on his back. There was something protective about the way Maddie lay beside Gage, so careful not to wake him. Derek couldn't blame her. Gage had never looked so peaceful. Moving silently through the house, Derek found a blanket and laid it over Gage and Maddie. Maddie wagged her tail and rested her head back on Gage's chest. Derek still hadn't gotten a hit on her tattoo, and looking at that sweet dog now, he hoped he wouldn't. Maybe Gage would find a new apartment and keep her. If not, Derek would keep her. And he wouldn't pretend part of him didn't expect Gage to visit. He had enough experience with dogs to know when one claimed a human. And the young man sleeping in his living room had definitely been claimed. That's it for chapter 2. I hope you enjoyed that, and I'm going to try to do these daily now so that we can get this book finished sometime this week. So check out probably tomorrow night, and I'll have chapter 3. And oh yeah, don't forget to like and subscribe, ring that little bell, and I'll see you in the next